Some mysteries are swallowed by time the instant they happen, and some never melt, even after 40 winters bury them whole. Rapids, Iowa. A gentle city washed in the glow of Christmas lights, soft amber bulbs trembling against the snow, like distant heartbeats trying to warm the night. But the night of December 19th, 1979, a night strangely beautiful, brutally cold, left a razor-thin scar across the city's memory. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a chase. It wasn't chaos. It was just a car, parked in the Westdale Mall lot, still, silent, forgotten by the world like a frozen monument. And inside it lay a question no one could answer. Who killed Michelle Martinko? And even more terrifying, why? 4 decades later, that question still knocks against the minds of everyone who ever touched the case. Investigators, journalists, Cedar Rapids locals, Michelle's family, even those who came much later, when the file had long sunk beneath layers of dust. Because this wasn't just a death, it was an absence. A cold, cavernous void deep enough to swallow every theory ever proposed. And that night, the night everything began, came without warning. No one saw Michelle being followed. No one heard a cry for help. No rushed footprints in the snow. No sounds of struggle. Only the cold. And a silence so absolute it felt deliberate. But sometimes, silence is the loudest confession. Today, we're going back not through memory, but through what remains. A dust-sized fragment of DNA, a stray fingerprint, the faint winter scent of 1979 trapped between old pages, and the relentless obsession of those who refuse to look away. We will step into that night, walk the frost-drowned streets, stop before the ice-coated Buick, and stare directly at a truth no one had enough light to see 40 years ago. A mystery that refused to fade. A killer who left nothing behind. A city that never truly slept again. And the story, like the falling snow, begins to descend. Slow, cold, each flake carrying a shard of the truth. The night of December 19th, 1979 opened with a strange kind of glow. Christmas lights spilling down the streets like golden honey over a sheet of silver snow. The air was so cold that every breath crystallized instantly, blooming into mist before settling as a thin, glassy film on the coats of passers-by. In Cedar Rapids, winter wasn't just weather, it was rhythm, memory, a shared pulse. But that night, it was colder than usual. Cold enough to make the bulbs outside storefronts tremble as if clutching to their last warmth. Cold enough that a single exhale could erase the frost on a car window. And Michelle Martinko, 18 bright, alive in every step, walked into that cold wearing soft gloves, her blonde hair loosely tied back, her face tinged with a quiet excitement. She had just left her school banquet, a warm, gentle evening filled with laughter and holiday music. Michelle wasn't the type to dramatize anything. She loved simplicity, subtlety, small joys. A beautiful winter coat that was all she wanted that night when she drove the beige Buick to Westdale Mall. To her friends, Michelle was the warm light in winter, kind, sharp, optimistic, but not naive. She noticed things. She felt things. She paid attention. But sometimes, the smallest things lead us to the sharpest turns. At Westdale Mall, newly opened at the time, Michelle walked quietly among the last shoppers. Christmas melodies drifted from ceiling speakers, blending with a soft click of heels on polished stone. Warm air from the storefronts melted the frost in her hair, making it shimmer under the neon lights. Store employees remembered her vividly. Polite, elegant, gently reserved. Others interviewed years later remembered something stranger. A few men standing in corners of the mall, their eyes lingering on Michelle a beat too long. None of them approached. None spoke. None followed her, obviously. But sometimes a stare is the first step towards something dark. Michelle didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and found nothing unusual about it. Holiday crowds always blur with wandering glances. Around 10 p.m., she left the mall. The Buick waited beneath the cold wind. Street lamps cast long, shaky beams across the parking lot, thin candles about to burn out. No cameras. No nearby security guards. No notable footsteps around the car. Just Michelle, keys in hand, breath turning white, and a winter night about to close in. The moment she opened the door, no one ever saw it. The moment the city would spend 40 years chasing, the moment the story snapped and fell into darkness. What happened in the minutes that followed, no one knows. No scream, no struggle outside the vehicle, no shadowed figure, nothing. Only later would investigators realize everything happened inside the car, a space too small to escape, too sealed for anyone to notice. The Buick sat there all night, frozen, untouched, a mystery waiting for morning. Westdale Mall closed. The last employees drifted out, the metal security doors sliding down with a sound like the end of a chapter. Outside, the parking lot held only a handful of cars, the yellow lights stretching across the pavement like needles piercing the night. Michelle walked through those thin beams of light, unaware she was stepping into a story that would last almost half a century. Police files say she showed no fear, no quick glances over the shoulder, no accelerated steps, no tension in her posture, which led to the first and one of the most unsettling early theories. Michelle might have known the person who approached her, or the person moved fast, quiet, confident. The car door opened. No witnesses. No unusual sounds. No signs of a struggle outside. No tracks circling the car. A silence so perfect it seemed intentional. And then, the disappearance began. While the city slept, Michelle's Buick remained exactly where she left it, encased in deepening frost. The night air left a milky haze on the windows, smoothing every surface into a cold, opaque mask. And inside, the truth waited. The next morning, a mall security guard noticed the unmoved car. What caught his eye wasn't the vehicle itself. It was the untouched frost. No handprints, no wiped windows. No warmth from within. Then he looked closer and saw what the entire city feared. Michelle, still, silent. Beyond explanation, in that moment, Cedar Rapids fell into the coldest winter it had ever known, and a mystery officially began. When police discovered Michelle the next morning, Cedar Rapids was still half asleep beneath its quilt of winter silence. Only the bronze Buick stood awake, stranded in the empty parking lot, like a monument no one asked for. Its windows were fogged white, its doors sealed tight, and inside, the color of blood had already turned the shade of dried rust. The car wasn't forced open. Her purse lay untouched on the back seat. Her money was still there. Nothing was stolen. And that terrified investigators more than anything else. Because this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't opportunistic. This was intimate. Michelle had been stabbed 29 times, precision cuts, delivered with a cold, unwavering intent. The wounds across her chest and neck weren't simply meant to kill her. They were meant to dominate her, to assert a sickening ownership over her final moments. It wasn't robbery. It wasn't random. It wasn't rage without direction. It was obsession. A veteran officer later put it in a way no one ever forgot. That man didn't kill Michelle. He unleashed whatever had been living inside him. And then came the traces, small, almost invisible, but enough to haunt detectives for decades. A tiny streak of blood on the seat, not Michelle's. A strand of hair caught on the metal clasp of her coat. A faint fingerprint smeared on the inside of the door. Clues that, in another era, could have solved everything. But in 1979, forensic science was barely a whisper of what it would become. No DNA profiling. No genetic databases. No nationwide fingerprint systems. Back then, this was as close to the perfect crime as anyone could commit. And the killer knew it. Investigators began piecing together the last hours of Michelle's life, one witness at a time. A store clerk remembered her as polite, calm, not a hint of fear. A classmate mentioned she'd seemed quieter in recent weeks. A boy from school said, someone was obsessed with her. Everybody knew. But the most unsettling testimony came from a woman who had walked past the parking lot that night. I saw a man standing very close to her car. He didn't move. Like he was waiting for someone. No one could identify him. No one could remember his face. No one knew where he went after that. Other mall goers recalled seeing a stranger lingering in the corridors during the Christmas rush, a man who never bought anything, who paced the hallways with hands in his pockets, who watched people more than he watched the merchandise. One witness swore he wore a knit cap, Another said he didn't. One remembered him tall. Another insisted he was average height. In cases like this, witnesses don't offer clarity. They offer fog. And in that fog, suspicion multiplied. Ex-boyfriends were questioned. Acquaintances were interrogated. Anyone who might have crossed Michelle's path became a suspect. But every lead dissolved the moment police touched it. The truth, it seemed, was hiding in plain sight, just out of reach, wrapped in the unreliable memory of strangers. Throughout the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, Michelle Martinko's case became the wound Cedar Rapids learned to live with but never healed from. Detectives chased young men who had been in the mall that night. They hunted recent drifters who passed through town. They tracked down anyone with a whisper of violence in their past. Every few years, a new detective would inherit the case full of hope, only to be swallowed by its cold vacuum. Folders grew thicker. Suspect lists grew longer. Confidence grew thinner. The town changed, new buildings, new families, new winters, but the story of Michelle never left. She was the girl frozen in time, the girl whose car sat untouched in the snow, the girl the city could not save. Some officers privately believed the killer had died. Some believed he'd moved states away. Some believed he still lived among them, quiet, ordinary, unnoticed. What no one imagined was the truth waiting far in the future. That science, not memory, not witnesses, not luck, would one day break open the case. But back then, in the long, dark stretch of those decades, all Cedar Rapids had was a ghost. A girl who never made it home. A murderer who had never been found. And a city that went to sleep every winter night wondering whether the cold had kept the secret or protected the man who created it. For 40 years, Michelle's case sat like a sealed vault, untouchable, immovable, immune to time. But in the early 2000s, a new language began rewriting the rules of crime. DNA. What had once been a smear of blood on the Buick seat, barely noticeable under the winter frosts, suddenly became the most important voice in the entire file. Technicians extracted a profile. Not Michelle's, someone else's. Someone male, someone alive, someone who had been inside that car. But DNA profiling, at that time, was like holding a key with no door. The killer's genetic code existed, yet matched nothing in any database. The crime had been frozen in 1979. Forensic science had thawed in 2008. And now, the two eras finally collided. One officer said, it was like hearing a whisper in a room that had been silent for decades. But a whisper wasn't enough. They needed a name, a face, a living suspect, and for that, they turned to a new, controversial frontier. Genetic genealogy. Investigators uploaded the unknown DNA into open-source ancestry databases, places built for hobbyists searching for their great-grandparents, not hunters tracking a killer. And then, a hit. Weak, distant, but real. The DNA matched with several distant relatives scattered across the Midwest, none close enough to be suspects, but close enough to build out branches on a sprawling genetic tree. This was forensic archaeology, digging through bloodlines instead of dirt. Genealogists worked alongside detectives, mapping family histories, cross-referencing birth records, tracing migrations, eliminating entire branches of the family until one thin line remained. A line that pointed to a man born in Iowa, a man who moved quietly through life, a man who had no criminal record, no connection to Michelle, no reason on paper to be a killer, Jerry Lynn Burns. The name struck investigators like a cold wind. Not because it was familiar, but because it was ordinary. The best killers aren't shadows. They're wallpaper. But one question remained. Was his DNA a match? To know for sure, they had to get his genetic material, without alerting him. So they followed him, waited, watched. And when Jerry casually sipped from a plastic cup at a restaurant, leaving it behind, detectives moved like ghosts. They collected the cup, tested it, and the result came back with the finality of a slamming door. Match. 1 in 100 billion. The man from the Buick. When detectives finally brought Jerry Lynn Burns into the interrogation room, he didn't panic. He didn't sweat. He didn't crumble. He sat calmly, hands folded, expression mild, like a man waiting for his oil change to finish. They told him why he was there. They told him about the DNA. They told him they knew. Jerry didn't deny being in Cedar Rapids in 1979. He didn't deny owning similar clothing. He didn't deny that he might have been near the mall. But when asked how his DNA got inside Michelle's car, he simply said, "I don't have an answer for that." No outrage, no confusion, no fear. Just a hollow calmness, as if the truth had been surgically removed from his memory. One detective later said, "It was like talking to someone who had emptied out his own soul." Jerry claimed he didn't remember Michelle, didn't remember the night, didn't remember anything. But memory loss doesn't explain DNA. It doesn't explain blood. It doesn't explain a perfect match. Some killers confess in silence. Jerry confessed by sitting still. When the trial opened in 2020, Cedar Rapids felt the weight of 40 winters lifting slowly, painfully. The courtroom filled with faces aged by time, grief, and a need for closure. The prosecution laid out their narrative with surgical clarity. Jerry Lynn Burns' DNA was found inside the Buick. He had no explanation for it. He had no alibi. He had no connection to Michelle Place, which made the crime even more chilling. This wasn't personal. This wasn't revenge. This was predation. The defense argued contamination, procedural error, coincidence. But DNA doesn't care about theories. It tells the truth without emotion. Witnesses from 1,979 testified with voices that trembled not from fear, but from memory. Michelle's sister spoke of an ache that never thawed. Investigators described decades spent chasing a ghost. Forensic experts presented charts, graphs, probabilities so astronomical they left the room silent. And when the verdict finally came, it landed with the force of a lifetime compressed into one moment. Guilty, first-degree murder. Jerry didn't flinch, not even once. The judge's gavel fell, and for a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to find its rhythm again. In the hush that followed, the courtroom turned into a chamber of quiet reckonings. Jurors laced their fingers together, as if trying to hold steady the weight of 40 years. Michelle's family leaned into one another, hands trembling with a fragile, exhausted kind of relief. Reporters scribbled the final lines of a story that had shaped an entire lifetime. Outside, the courthouse doors opened to cameras and murmurs, but inside, the moment stayed still, filled with faces that had waited decades for one simple human truth to be spoken aloud. The sentence, "life behind bars," was delivered, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a solemn clarity, a quiet accounting, a recognition that the balance had finally shifted, even if the ledger would always carry its missing years. For the investigators who had chased this shadow for so long, relief came softened by something heavier. Closure did not erase the past, but it placed the past in its proper place, with a name and a consequence. After 40 years, the story that began in a frozen parking lot finally found its ending. Michelle Martinko, the girl who only wanted a new winter coat, was no longer a mystery trapped beneath layers of snow. Her family, who had carried 4 decades of unanswered questions, could finally exhale. A long, trembling breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Retired investigators returned to the courtroom, older now, quieter, witnessing justice at last. Slow, flawed, imperfect, but real, and finally done. Outside, Cedar Rapids felt different. Softer, warmer, as if the whole city had been holding its breath since 1979, and at last could let go. Justice cannot revive the past. It cannot heal every wound. It cannot give back the years stolen by grief, but it closes a door, and sometimes that is enough. For the first time in 40 winters, the cold that surrounded this case finally melted away. Michelle's story does not end in fear. It ends in truth. And maybe that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath this tragedy. That even in the darkest winters of our lives, the ones where the answers seem buried, where hope feels frozen, where time appears to stand still, truth still finds a way to break through the ice. It arrives late. It arrives imperfect, but it arrives. Life is short, and time slips by faster than we imagine. What we can do, what we must do, is cherish every precious moment we still have with the people we love. Stay far from wrongdoing however you can. Keep your mind clean, love more, give more, treat everyone with sincerity, and with the full truth of your heart.